Welcome to Books, Kids, and Creations, a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I am your host, Tracy Bloom, and I feature people who inspire and uplift future generations with their work. And today I have the privilege of speaking with Kaela Rivera. She is the author of the Cece Rios series, which is now, you just put out book 2, and the book series is so cool. People have described it as Coco meets Pokemon, and it's just fantastic. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited that the sequel just came out, and it's a good time. It's a good time.
Yeah, and it's like spooky season, so
Yeah, spooky
we're all into these
season.
like kind of haunting and scary stories. Well, your story isn't very like cringy scary, but it has that like perfect level of like spook and haunt and mysticism to it. And I'm so excited to dive into these questions. So where did the inspiration for this series come from? Because it seems like there's a lot of like I had to Google some of the words because I'm assuming they're are they
They're Nahuatl, a lot of them.
okay, yeah, they were foreign to me. Like I just had never heard of some of the things in the book. So where did the inspiration come from?
Well, I guess in two places, mainly. So world building or more like fantasy wise, I had been exploring this idea of like, what would it be like if people had souls on the outside of their bodies? Like how would that affect the way we treated each other, the way that the world worked, things like that. It's like it's such a scary idea, like, oh, so
Yeah.
exposed. And I tried like multiple like attempts at that sort of idea with a story, and none of it was really gelling. And then I went and visited my abuelo, my grandpa Rivera, down in California, for the first time since I was like a very small child. And so I got to meet him and talk with him, and he told me all kinds of stories about what it was like for him growing up in Mexico. He was actually born in the United States, but he doesn't really remember it, of course, because he was taken over when he was like 1 into Mexico, and he was like raised there for all of his formative years. And he's got so many amazing stories, sad stories, scary stories, funny stories,
Yeah.
about what it was like. And it was just so powerful for me getting to really connect with that side of my heritage, and like reconnect to that side of the family through my abuelo. And all of that was just so powerful. And he was telling me stories of like, yes, some of the scary stories and scary things that did happen. And I was like, bro, that's so cool
Yeah.
in like a scary way. But and I decided I just got a thirst for it later where I was like, I want to research all of these different things. So I started researching the myths and legends and things like that, putting more contextual background. I had already studied Mexico a little bit, but I did it a little bit more thoroughly, looking into Mexico is a very mestizo country. Most of Latin America is now. But that mestizo means mixed. There's a lot of different influences that come together into the whole of Mexico. For like the ancient background of the Aztecs and Mayans, although Mayans are still a tribe today, and they speak Nahuatl still. And of course Afro Latinx, when Spain brought over slaves, unfortunately. And then Spain, of course, and then all the different kinds of native tribes that there were and are. And like all the different stories that comes together as, and the ones that they made together as well. So I just was so fascinated by all that. I studied it more and more. And then it was like one night, I think in 2016, the very end of 2016, one month, where I was like, ooh, and I just suddenly thought, what if I paired that stuff with my souls on the outside idea? And then like I was like, I'm gonna pick out somebody and he's scary, and like and then I just welded it together, and it came together so quickly. I wrote like 10,000 words in one night because I
Oh
was
my
like, I'm not
gosh.
sleeping. I'm too excited.
Wow.
So yeah.
It was like that story was just begging to come out. Yeah.
Yes, it's like it had been like boiling, pieces of it had been boiling and simmering, and then the moment they got together, I was like, I have to do this now.
So were there pieces of legends that you really gravitated to and then put your own twist on?
Yes, definitely. I
Yeah.
think all of them have definitely my twist on it.
Yeah, there were so many parts where I was like, wow, what a cool concept. And I don't want to like give a lot of way about it, but there was, one part where the person lost part of their soul. And I think people can relate to that on so many levels, where you're trying to fight for someone and you're trying to get part of that back. And I went, oh my gosh, I wonder if there was like, was there like a part of your life that created that?
Yeah, well, it's because of the sequel, that's like one of the main, compelling things about the sequel is one of them loses part of their soul and has to go get it from Devil's Alley, where the criaturas live. But but that comes mostly from I wanted in the first one she gets kidnapped by a criatura, and we have a sense that it was very hard for her when she gets brought back.
Yeah.
And so the second was, I really wanted it to be sort of a parallel or a metaphor for trauma, as
Yeah.
that like you have lost part of your soul and you need to go and get it back. And of course, we all do different things to try and get those pieces of us that we feel are missing.
Yeah.
And half of them will only lose more of us, and the other half will heal us. And it's all of us trying to figure out which one's which.
Yeah.
And so that's mostly the compelling part. Like that's what's behind that.
Yeah.
And that does come from my day-to-day life, in that like I have experienced trauma. I do have PTSD, and I wanted that addressed in a middle grade way.
Right, right. What a great way to put that in there without being so blatant about it, but it's there. And I think anybody can read between the lines that it's there. And I thought, oh, what a crafty way to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was important to me that get addressed, especially because there are kids who are in those situations now, at that, either at Juana's age, who's the character who has to go on that adventure,
Yeah.
or at Cece's age, the main character, 12, even younger sometimes. And that journey inevitably will happen at some point in their lives, even if they're not searching for those lost pieces yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're in the stage where they're just realizing there's a piece lost, even.
Right.
So I wanted that to be there for them, because it happens to a lot more people than we expect, and it's always, especially for the people who do have that journey to go on, very often they don't realize that it's about them.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
like, oh yeah, wow, what an intense experience, and then later they're like, oh wait, actually I know why I vibed with that so hard now.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
So with this book, was there so you said you wrote, 10,000 words roughly in about one night, and then um was there, from start to finish, I guess, how long did this second book take you to write compared to the first book?
I mean, it definitely took longer. CC1 was kind of special in how long it took, in that like I wrote almost all of it in 1 month. I think it was actually like 3 weeks or something. And then for other reasons, I had to put it down and work on other stuff.
Yeah.
And then I came back to it a few months later and I finished it in one weekend. So like altogether, it was basically a month if you total it.
Yeah.
CC2 took longer than that. And some of that was because I was writing the sequel before, like, before we even had a deal for the first one. I was like,
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do the story. And of course, as I revised Cece and a lot of things changed about it, I had to like throw away large parts of what I had been writing and be like, that doesn't make sense anymore, and change it. And then once we had CC1 basically all put together, we had the final draft. That's when I kind of returned to it again. And a lot of things changed about that one too, as I was exploring it. What do I really want from this? I knew half of what I really wanted from it, but I didn't know the other half. And that was the journey. So altogether, that one probably took, I mean, if I'm totaling it up, it probably took somewhere around 4 months,
Okay. Yeah.
So longer, but the revisions, I don't, it's awkward because there was so many changes to it during the process, which of course happens when you're writing something that the first one isn't complete, isn't
Right.
through its revisions.
And this is published through Harper Collins, right?
Right.
So then did they also make their own edits to it after you wrote it, or were they involved in the creation process?
Of CC2 or 1?
2.
They were not really involved in the creation process. And that's mostly because we had sold them CC1 just as CC1.
Okay.
And then we were using CC2 as a pitch for, and I was like, all right, we're gonna please give me a sequel, and then next year I'll convince you to give me a third one. Yeah. Like, please.
Yeah.
So I put together, like, my agent and I put together our whole submission package, wrote the first 3 chapters, got it a lot stronger than it had been. And then it wasn't totally complete at that point, but it was at like 40,000 words, so it needed like 30,000 more. It was more than halfway done anyway. It might have been slightly more than that even, so I don't know. But that was part of our pitch, is like, hey, it's almost, it's pretty close to being done. I can write pretty fast. Yes.
Yeah, that is fast.
So I was like, please. And submitted it, and then they returned with an offer for the second 2 books. For 2 books, and I was like, oh, I don't have to convince them next year for the 3rd one. Yes. So I was really glad about that, because initially when we went to them with the sequel discussion, I was like, they were like, what about a spin-off story? And I was like, I don't, maybe in the future. But actually I have a really solid plan for the sequel right now. So
Right.
So, and I'm glad that did actually win them over. I was grateful for that.
Yeah, and you've also won some awards for this book as well, or for the
for the first one.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was nominated, but
yeah. And I could see, as I was reading it, I could totally see it as a movie. Or have you thought about like trying to pitch it as a screenplay, or try to write it as a screenplay, because you seem like a fast writer?
Thank you. We actually do have film agents, and they had discussions with a couple studios as well as Netflix. There was a live action version pitched around, and then there was a animated version pitched around, which honestly I'd love either one.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, but nothing solid came out of them for various reasons, I guess, which everybody tells me is just sort of the way of film. So
someone else told me that, I forget, it was somebody I had on one of my earlier shows, said, because he had many successful screenplays written. And he goes, well, yeah, like probably out of 40, you get 1. And I'm like, what? Like, how many have you written? Like, that's an incredible amount of like rejection.
Yeah.
But I guess people don't really talk about that aspect of being a writer, that you might create something and it might sit on the shelves for a little bit, and then that time comes when someone goes, oh yeah, remember she had this, and then
right, exactly. So I am hoping that will happen with the film. I will say I wrote like 10 books before Cece, or Cece is my 10th. I can't quite remember. So I definitely know the rejection thing. So I'm just like, hey, if it pans out, it pans out.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, because there is, the process of you get the agent, and then the agent pitches your work. So it's like a double pitching. Like you have to pitch and get that agent first, and then you have to go do the, pitch of the story. So, with you, did you pitch, how long did it take for Harper Collins to pick up the first Cece?
Harper picked it up. Well, it's kind of a special process with how it happened with Harper, so I'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
But when we went out on submission, and it was 6 months later when we got sort of the offer from Harper. No, I say offer with like air quotes, because they were like, hey, this was from an editor who was her first time becoming an acquisitions editor. She's fantastic, Stephanie Gearden, love her. And she was like, so, because she doesn't have a lot of sway in the house at the time, because this is her very first project she's trying to pick up. She's like, can you make these revisions before I take it to the board, the acquisitions board? And I was like, well, okay. My agent was like, if you want, we can do that. And I was like, well, okay. So I did it. I don't take too long in revisions, or at least I didn't at the time. I think I take a little bit longer now.
Yeah.
More experienced, I see more problems. But I made the changes. She took it to the acquisitions board, and then they accepted. So that was like we got the offer kind of, and then it was like 2 months, and then it got to acquisitions, and then they made an offer.
Oh,
And that's even funnier because they made an offer on it as a middle grade because it was originally a young adult novel.
oh,
They're like, so if you change it to middle grade, we'll take it. And I was like, go on. And I ended up really loving that decision because I was like, man, I had always planned to get into middle grade, but I love it as more of like starting out and like my wheelhouse now. I was like, I
yeah.
actually really love that. So,
Yeah, because the age on it is like 9 and up. And
mhm.
that's just the perfect age. I mean, like you really nailed it as far as what you put in there. And I love that there's like, I mean, in my thought, I thought are they spirit guide companions, the animals?
Criaturas. They're sort of
Okay.
like shapeshifters. They're
Okay.
people, but they also shapeshift into animals, or the animal criaturas are anyway. There's also dark criaturas, and they're sort of like the more ghoulish ones from legend, like La Llorona.
Yeah, very cool. I loved it because like I don't know, you just described them in such fantastic ways. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a great concept to have these little animal companions. And so like for kids, you can imagine them, but they also have like these deep backgrounds to them and where they've been, they've seen some stuff and
I have seen things. Yeah. That describes them pretty well.
yeah. Yeah, so are you working on book 3 then, I'm assuming?
I'm revising it right now, actually. Yeah. Yeah. The deadline is next month. So
Oh, cool.
we're in like major revision time.
Yeah, and then do you have like for the end of this year, do you have like author visits planned and any kind of like book events coming up?
I don't have any major book events coming up. I do have one school visit. My health hasn't been super great this side of the year. I got mono,
Oh,
just a couple months ago, and I'm like, so I'm really dragging, and that's limited the amount of events and stuff I can do. But I have things lined up for next year. And of course, I'm going to be using the end of the year to work on a lot of cool projects that I have in mind. So I'm really excited for this.
yeah, I love it. And do you do any work with theater? I couldn't remember if you've done work with theater.
I actually was in theater in high school.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking like the Cece Rios, the musical.
Yes, bro, I would love that actually.
Like, well, the characters are so cool that like you could just see them even on the stage, like the lion and the ocelot and all the little,
Yeah.
so anyway, it's just
Yeah, honestly, I would be so down for that. Yeah. Like I love musicals, so like the one time I was in a musical, I wasn't that great at it because I always forget lyrics. That's just like a major component of my personality apparently. But I love musicals, so
I do
if
too.
anybody's interested, let me
Right?
know.
It's out there.
Just saying.
And I always ask people that come on the show, what advice do you have for future generations in general? It could be anyone who's looking to follow in your footsteps or just in general.
That's a very good question. I think I think that I would recommend this is going to sound weird for a second, but I would recommend realism, adopting it and embracing it. And I don't mean realism in like the way that people often pitch it, which is actually cynicism. I would pitch it as realism is accepting that there is immense darkness and pain in the world, and that people can be very terrible, but at the same time accepting hope and embracing that fully because people are capable of immense beauty, and immense goodness. Their potential for kindness and goodness, righteousness is immense. And every human being has immense value in just existing. So accepting that both of those things are true, I think that we get closer to truth in our creative work when we address both of those things, when we don't try to excuse evil and at the same time we don't try to over alienate or or over demonize people either. Where you accept that they like the villain is the villain, we're not excusing that, but that we understand how they got there, or that the hero is a good person, they are good, but they do mess up,
Yeah.
and they do have flaws. Like when I think that we channel both a better quality in our day-to-day life, as well as a better depth and breadth in our work when we can do that. So I guess that's a little philosophical,
Yeah,
but
that's fantastic advice that I think people of all ages can learn from and put into their everyday train of thought. Yeah, so that is wonderful advice. And for anybody who's looking to pick up your books, I will post a link to your website here afterwards. Book 2 just came out. This is the Cece Rios series, soon to be trilogy.
Yes. Woo!
And thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing your wonderful work. I loved it. So
Oh, thank you so much for having me and for reading. I really appreciate it, and give me an opportunity to share about it.
well, thank you.